Hi, my name's Kevin Hicks. Welcome to my YouTube channel, The History Squad. Now today's video is a little bit different from my normal historical videos. This one has got a little bit of history, but it's about the famous character Scrooge from Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Now, I got commissioned to do this story at Kenilworth Castle in the Midlands of England many years ago. So I spent a lot of time researching, reading the book, getting the story all ready when I was told you have 20 minutes. That's your lot. So I had to praise it right the way down. So that's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to give you the Kevin Hicks shortened version of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. So, a little bit of history about Charles Dickens, a hero of mine. Not a soldier, not an admiral, just an ordinary guy. Born in 1812, died in 1870. Had a difficult childhood. His father was not very good with money and ended up in a debtor's prison. I think it was Marshalsea. Charles Dickens himself had to go to work at a very early age. I think he was 12, and he's in a boot blacking factory. He was so good at his work, he was put into the window so people could see how the lads were working away. But his mother objected to it because she was a bit of a snob. He ended up writing those famous books, wasn't it? Tale of Two Cities, Oliver Twist, Nicholas Nickleby. Well, what a guy. Yeah, but it was his book, A Christmas Carol. Most people know it as Scrooge or Scrooged through the films. Not many people have actually, that I know, have actually read the book, A Christmas Carol. Now, when Charles Dickens went on the circuit reading these books to people, it really uplifted him. But the best was in Birmingham city centre at the town hall. The workman's evening. So it's the working class of Birmingham. My people. I'm a Birmingham lad, working class. I'm a Brummie. 2,500 Birmingham folk turned up. And at the end of it, in Dickens' own words, he was so uplifted by the reaction of those Birmingham folk. They were a favourite of his because he was a champion of the working class, of the poor. He used to walk round the streets of London late at night, sometimes 3 o'clock in the morning. And what he saw greatly affected him. The violence, the poverty, so much so that he became a philanthropist. A decade of his life he spent working for fallen women and girls fallen upon hard times. This guy was for the underdog. And it reflects in his book, A Christmas Carol. So let me tell you the story. To begin with, Marley was dead. We know he was dead because the registrar signed the death register, and so did the undertaker, and so did the chief mourner at his funeral, Ebenezer Scrooge, who was in fact his only mourner. Marley was dead as a doornail. You must understand this for sure, otherwise the story I am about to tell you will make no sense whatsoever. So, once upon a time, many years ago, on a dark, foggy Christmas Eve in London, Ebenezer Scrooge was in his office in his counting house. His door from his office was open so he could keep an eye on his clerk, who was housed in a kind of outer office, a tank if you like. He liked to keep an eye on him. Now, Scrooge had a fire and a little bit of warmth, but Bob Cratchit, his clerk, had but one piece of coal. And if that went out and Bob Cratchit went to get some more coal, which was housed in Scrooge's office, he was told, in no uncertain terms, that if he wanted more coal, he could seek other employment. Scrooge, what a nasty piece of work, sharp as flint, a tight, miserable miser of a man. And then the door flew open. "Merry Christmas, Uncle!" It was Ebenezer Scrooge's nephew. "Bah, humbug," said Scrooge. That's the famous word, isn't it? "Uncle," said his nephew, "I've come to invite you to Christmas tomorrow." "Bah, humbug. How can you say that?" And then Scrooge turns on him and says, Any fool with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own Christmas pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. Oh, uncle, said his nephew, Merry Christmas. And Scrooge again turned on him. How can you say Merry Christmas? You're a year older, more in debt. What profit has ever Christmas brought you? And his nephew looks at his uncle and says, although Christmas has never put any gold in my pocket, uncle, I have profited much from it, with joy, with happiness. It's a time when men's hearts are open. Bah, humbug, said Scrooge. But at that, Bob Cratchit applauded Scrooge's nephew, and then Scrooge says to Bob Cratchit, if you don't keep quiet, you'll be finding yourself a new position. Oh, uncle, said his nephew, how can you be like that? And Scrooge looked at him and says, you keep Christmas in your way and I'll keep Christmas in my way. And then his nephew says, but uncle, you don't keep Christmas. So the nephew, Merry Christmas, as he left. Bah, humbug, were the words that followed him out of the room. And as he departed, two other people came in. They were pleasant gentlemen who now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. Scrooge and Marley, I believe, said one of the gentlemen. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Marley has been dead these 7 years, Scrooge replied. He died 7 years ago this very night. At this festive season, Mr. Scrooge, said one of the gentlemen, a few of us are endeavouring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. What shall I put you down for? Nothing, Scrooge replied. Are there no prisons? No workhouses for these people? They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there. Many can't go there, and many would rather die. If they would rather die, said Scrooge, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Now, good day, gentlemen. Seeing that it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentleman left. So sad when you think about it. But later on, 7 o'clock in the evening, so foggy and so dark, it was time to shut up the door. So Scrooge, as he's about to leave, he's putting on his hat and coat, when he turns to Bob Cratchit and says, I suppose you'll want the whole day off tomorrow. Oh, if it wouldn't be inconvenient, says Bob. It's very inconvenient. How would you like it if I stopped you £0.50? You'd feel ill-used then, wouldn't you? And Bob Cratchit just mumbles, but it's only once a year. Yes, once a year. I feel as if I'm having my pocket picked. You make sure you're here much earlier the day after. Do you understand? Yes, sir, said Bob Cratchit. And as Scrooge left, Bob Cratchit shut up the office, locked the door. Do you know he didn't have a coat? So in that foggy evening, he just wrapped his scarf around his neck and he ran all the way home to Camden Town, to his family. Scrooge, on the other hand, made his way to a melancholy tavern, dark and dingy, where he had a melancholy supper. He ordered an extra round of bread and butter, was told it would cost a halfpenny extra, so he did without the bread and butter and made his way to his abode. But it wasn't really his, it was Jacob Marley's. Scrooge had simply moved in after Jacob had died. He knew his way to this dark, dismal, dilapidated building. As he puts his key in the front door, he looks at the lion head door knocker. When it changes, it's Jacob Marley's face, just staring through and moaning slightly. Ooh. Scrooge takes another look, opens the door, slams it, locks it, bolts it, almost expects to see Jacob Marley's pigtail sticking out the back, but no. He then quickly looks around his apartment, lights a candle, up the stairs he goes, checks just the rooms. He's a bit spooked, but then he shuts the door to the parlour, double bolts it and sits down. Do you know, he'd had a bit of a head cold, had Scrooge, so now he has a bowl of gruel, thin soup, to warm him before he goes to bed. This was left by his housekeeper. And as he's eating his gruel, he hears a door slamming. Strange. He then hears a moan. Ooh. But he thinks he's just imagining it. And then he notices that the bell on the wall starts to move. And then it starts to ring violently. Whoa! Whoa! Coming up the stairs, and the rattling of chains. And then through the door appears the spirit, the ghost of Jacob Marley. Ooh, he's giving out the old ghost cries. Scrooge is taken aback, and right up to him comes Jacob Marley's spirit. He has a handkerchief tied around his head, as they did in those days for the dead, otherwise their mouth just gaped open. Now, Scrooge looks at him, and he's rubbing his eyes, and he's tingling his ears. Whoa, said Jacob Marley, who undoes the handkerchief around his face, and his jaw drops open. But then he speaks. You don't believe in me, do you? And Scrooge looks up at him. Can you sit down, Jacob? I can, says the spirit. So then do it, says Scrooge. Jacob Marley sits down, and he looks at Scrooge. You don't believe in me? And Scrooge says, no, you're a piece of undigested beef playing me up, or some cheese. In fact, if I was to swallow a toothpick now, I would be haunted for the rest of my life by goblins, but it would have been of my own making. Jacob Marley stands up and rattles the chain and screams at Scrooge. Wah! Scrooge, cowering down, is terrified out of his mind. Whoa, whoa! Listen to me, says Jacob Marley as he sits back down. You have a chance now, Ebenezer, a chance of redemption. And Ebenezer looks at Jacob Marley. What do you mean? You were a good man in life. You were a good businessman. Jacob Marley then says, mankind should have been my business. Charity should have been my work. You have a chance at redemption now. And then Scrooge looks at him and says, what's with all these chains and these money boxes that you're trailing behind you with this great weight? I forged these in life, and now I am cursed in death to drag them behind me for my sins. But you, Ebenezer, you have a chain much longer than mine. But as I've said, you have a chance of redemption. Scrooge looks at him and says, how? How could I redeem myself? You will be visited by 3 spirits tonight. The last stroke of 12, then at 1, and then at 2. Each one of these spirits will guide you. And Ebenezer Scrooge says, I'd rather not. And Jacob Marley stands up again and screams at Scrooge. But then the window just mysteriously opens. And in through the open window, Scrooge can hear tortured voices. He goes to the window, and there are thousands of spirits dragging their chains. And he sees one man who he knew in life dragging an enormous safe behind him. And Scrooge turns to the spirit of Jacob Marley and asks, what's he doing? All of these men in life forge those chains that they drag behind them in death. They implore the living, trying to help them, but they cannot. For they now must wander the earth for eternity, dragging their chains that they forged in life behind them. Oh, Scrooge, he says, as he drifts through the window and disappears. Scrooge shuts the window. He's terrified. 3 spirits will visit him. So he takes off his coat, puts on his dressing gown, puts on his nightcap, goes to bed and shuts the bed curtains tight behind him. Scrooge was awoken by the chiming of the bells at midnight. Cringing under his sheet, he waited as the bell struck 1, 2. At 12, he closed his eyes, shuddering, but nothing happened. He peeled back the sheets and sat up. There was a light shining from his darkened room. Strangely, his bed curtains simply parted, and there stood an apparition, glowing from within, old but yet childlike, see-through but solid. Are you the spirit whose coming was foretold? Are you the spirit of Christmas past, long past? The spirit looked at him, and with a booming voice said, I am the spirit of your past. Your welfare is my business, your reclamation. With that, the spirit came closer. Take my sleeve, Ebenezer Scrooge. No, for I am scared. Take my sleeve now. Scared out of his wits, Scrooge, dressed in but a nightcap and nightgown, took a hold of the spirit's sleeve, and they seemed to float towards the window. And then out of the window they flew to a place where Scrooge knew very well. It was his old school. He could see his friends all leaving on their carriages. I know this place. And they called out the names of his school pals. And then they drifted into the great hall of this school. And there in the corner was a lonely figure, cold in the corner, doing his work. It was a young Ebenezer. Scrooge was alone, left behind at Christmas. A lonely figure did he cut. And then they jump to another time, when Scrooge is sat at the same desk, when a voice rings out from the door. He turns, it's a young girl. Ebenezer, it's his sister. As they look on, they see the scene as this young Ebenezer Scrooge runs over to his sister Fan and embraces her and holds her tight. What are you doing here? Father has relented. You must come home now. You are coming home for Christmas. Scrooge, looking upon the scene, turns to the spirit of Christmas past. Oh, my darling sister, how I loved her. Then away they go. This time to a warehouse. I know this place, said Scrooge as he looked on, and there are figures dancing up and down. It's old Fezziwig and his wife. Oh, they're having a wonderful time. The dance at Christmas Eve. Oh, up and down they went, and Scrooge with the spirit watched as he came into view as the young apprentice. Oh, how Fezziwig used to make us dance, how he made us so happy. And the spirit of Christmas past looked upon Scrooge and said, this cost but £4, this feast he's put on for his workers. And Scrooge watched with a big smile and his heart beating as Fezziwig bade all of his guests, all of his workers, a Merry Christmas. Then another apparition. It changed to outside the warehouse. Fezziwig, unhappy in his coach, as Scrooge and Marley take possession of his business. Scrooge looked upon this scene and felt guilty of how they had taken over Fezziwig's business. One of the apprentices came up. Mr. Scrooge, will you be keeping us on? And Scrooge looked at him and says, how much does Fezziwig pay you? 5 shillings, sir. I'll keep you on for 4. Very good, sir. At that, Scrooge looks at the spirit of Christmas past and he says, I would like to have a word with my clerk, Bob Cratchit, right now. But then the scene fades. Away they go to a parlour, and there standing is young Scrooge with a young woman. Scrooge turns to the apparition and says, why, it's Alice, my fiancée. And then he watches and listens to the conversation. Alice says to the young Scrooge, our pledge was an old one, made when we were young. But Ebenezer, you no longer love me, do you? I've never said that, says the young Scrooge. Alice turns to him and places the engagement ring into his hand and says, your love is now for money, for gold, for riches. Tell me this, Scrooge. If you met me now as a poor woman, would you offer your hand in marriage? Scrooge could not answer. So silently Alice, his fiancée, left. Scrooge turns to the spirit of Christmas past and says, "No more, no more, show me no more." But the spirit turns to Scrooge and points. One shadow more. And then they appear in a bedroom. A man is standing there, and in the bed is a woman who is obviously dying. A doctor is next to her. Scrooge looks. It's his sister, Fan. "No, no, no," he cries out as he watches. As she calls out his name, Ebenezer. He runs to her, but she drifts into unconsciousness. She is dying. He looks at the baby in the crib. He storms out of the room, so angry. But then the spirit makes Scrooge pay attention now. Because Fan, his sister, wasn't dead. She called out, "Ebenezer, Ebenezer." Her dying wish was simple. "Ebenezer, take care of your nephew. Take care of my son. Look after him when I am gone." She then dies. Ebenezer looks on at the scene. His heart is breaking. He turns to the spirit of Christmas past, who begins to fade. He's getting older. And as he fades, Scrooge finds himself back in bed. He's awoken by the clock chiming 1 o'clock. At the stroke of 1, nothing happens. Scrooge opens his bed curtains. He can see the adjoining room. There is a light shining from under the door. He walks over, he opens the door, and there is a great man with an enormous beard, dressed in a green coat all the way down to his feet, edged in white fur. "Come in, man! Come in and know me well." Scrooge's eyes are wide open. There is a feast in the room that he knew a few minutes ago was empty. Turkey and goose and Christmas pudding. My goodness me, he doesn't quite know what to say. "Are you the spirit of Christmas present?" "I am, man, I am. Come and know me." And then he holds out his arm. "Take my robe." And Scrooge says, "I'd rather not." "Take my robe." All of a sudden, the spirit of Christmas present seems to have grown. Scrooge, a little terrified, takes hold of the spirit's sleeve. And they drift out and down into the streets below. There people are bustling about their business. Some of the shops are still open and people doing their last minute shopping, bustling around. But then they simply leave the streets and go home. The streets in the darkness are empty. And then other creatures appear, shabbily dressed, dirty, holding just a plate with a meal. And they make their way to the baker's. For what the baker will do is he will allow people to heat their meals through in the baker's oven once the bread has been baked. Scrooge looks around as a couple jostle into each other and they turn aggressively. They bend, "Stop. Oh, I am sorry, neighbour. Not on this Christmas day. I do beg your pardon and a Merry Christmas to you." And the spirit of Christmas looks at Scrooge and says, "See, they know Christmas. Take my sleeve." And they find themselves in Bob Cratchit's house in the parlour. There, the children are running around. The mother is busying with the food. But Bob Cratchit and his youngest son, Tiny Tim, aren't there. Ebenezer and the spirit look on as they play a trick on Bob Cratchit. Martha, his oldest daughter, who is visiting, "Hide so father can't see you." She skips behind the scullery door just as her father, Bob Cratchit, with Tiny Tim on his shoulder, enter into the parlour. "Oh, father, father, oh, Tim, oh, Tim." Tiny Tim can't walk properly. He's lame in one leg. And they observe as he hobbles across the parlour and sits on his stool and hangs his crutch by the fireplace. His father looks at him with such loving eyes because Bob Cratchit adores his younger son, who often meets him from work and stands in the cold. "Did you know that?" says the spirit of Christmas. "Did you know that that little boy, Tiny Tim, waits for his father, sometimes for an hour in the cold, waiting for him to finish work from your establishment?" Scrooge looks down guiltily. "Where's Martha?" says Bob Cratchit. They all look sad. Oh, she couldn't come, Father. And Bob Cratchit is so sad. He wanted his eldest daughter there for Christmas dinner. And out she bursts and they all laugh. And they gather round as the goose is brought in. But Mrs. Cratchit is concerned. I'm not sure if the pudding will be good enough. Did I use enough flour? She panics, but the pudding is brought out and it looks delicious. About the size of a small cannonball, says the spirit of Christmas present. Not much meat on the goose, is there? But they tuck in and they have a dinner. And then punch will be served, gin and lemon. A toast, says Bob Cratchit. A toast to the founder of the feast, to my employer, Ebenezer Scrooge, on this Christmas day. Scrooge's face lights up. He looks at the spirit of Christmas present. But Mrs. Cratchit says, No, I won't toast him. He keeps you at work far too long and pays you a measly 15 shillings a week. Bob Cratchit looks at his wife and says, But my dear, it's Christmas Day. Oh, all right then, she says. I'll toast him, but this once on Christmas Day. And they all raise their glasses and toast Ebenezer Scrooge. And just as they're putting down their glasses, Tiny Tim looks around at everybody with such a beaming smile and says, Merry Christmas and God bless us, everyone. Scrooge, hearing the feeble voice of this boy, looks at the spirit of Christmas present. Will he live? And the spirit of Christmas looks at him sharp and says, Better he die sooner and decrease the surplus population. Scrooge is horrified. But then the spirit of Christmas present says, I can see an empty stool and a crutch without an owner next year. And then he offers Scrooge his sleeve. Away they drift again, to a lighthouse far away, and up to the top, and inside they see two men sat at a table having a drink. The light revolves around to keep ships away, and these two men, lonely on Christmas Day, raise a toast. Merry Christmas, my old friend. And the spirit of Christmas present looks at Scrooge and says, See, even here they know me. And then he takes his sleeve again and away to a ship at sea, tossing and turning. But on the bridge, the captain turns to his men and says, Merry Christmas, boys. Oh, Merry Christmas, sir. And they all burst into song. These know me. Then he offers his sleeve again, and away they drift to a dark town and into a cottage where a large group of people, a family and friends, are gathering and singing hymns and carols. Merry Christmas, smiles. But this is a poor family. Who are these people, says Scrooge to the spirit of Christmas present. These are coal miners. These hew the coal from the very bowels of the earth. These are hard-working folk, poor folk. And yet these people know me. The spirit of Christmas present offers once again his sleeve to Scrooge, and away they drift to the parlour of his nephew, where there is a grand feast upon the table, and he, together with his wife and all of their friends and family, are about to have a toast. But the nephew proposes it. To my uncle Ebenezer Scrooge, I wish you health and Merry Christmas. And everybody laughs. Why do you want to propose a toast for him? And he says, because he is my uncle and it is Christmas. And I feel sorry for the old man. He is missing out on a fine dinner. And they all smiled and they toasted Ebenezer Scrooge. And he watched with the spirit of Christmas present as the tables were cleared and a space was made and the piano strikes up. And they dance. And Scrooge wants to join in, but the spirit of Christmas present holds him back. Do not forget, Ebenezer, we are but shadows here. And Scrooge looks at him and he sees that the spirit of Christmas present does indeed grow old and weary. Are the spirit's life short here? My life upon this earth lasts but one day. And then Scrooge notes something really quite strange. "Forgive me for asking," says Scrooge, "but Spirit, is there something under your coat?" The Spirit then opens his coat, and at his feet are two small children, a boy and a girl, starving and filthy. "Are these your children?" asks Scrooge. The Spirit looks straight into the eyes of Scrooge and booms. "No," says the Spirit. "These are man's children. The boy is ignorance. The girl is want." "Have they no refuge? Have they no resources?" says Scrooge. "Are there no workhouses, no prisons?" says the Spirit. With that, the spirit of Christmas present fades, and Scrooge finds himself sat on the edge of his bed, awaiting the final spirit of Christmas. And at the stroke of 2 on the church bell, Scrooge awaits the next of the spirits, the spirit of Christmas yet to come. And there in the corner of the room, a dark, shadowy figure appears. You cannot see its face, for it is veiled in black. As this tall figure approaches, it points an almost skeletal hand at Scrooge, but says no word. And the spirit of Christmas yet to come offers his sleeve. Terrified, Scrooge grips a hold, and away they drift to a familiar room. And as they land, Scrooge looks on, and on the bed, covered with a sheet, is the body of a man. The spirit points to the man, and then points to Scrooge to pull back the sheet. But Scrooge is terrified. No, I cannot disturb him. Who is he? Who is this man? But then the sleeve is offered, and Scrooge, away to a familiar place. It's the stock exchange, where Scrooge conducts his business. "I know this business," said Scrooge. And as they look on, there are men talking. "Well, when did he die?" "Last night," says one to the other. "It'll be a cheap funeral, I'm bound." "Are you going to go?" "Oh, I won't be going. I didn't like the old cuss. Sharp as flint. Tight man, I didn't like him." "Oh, I'd go if there's lunch provided. But if I'm not fed, I will not go." The spirit offers his sleeve, and Scrooge takes hold. And away they drift to a strange abode that Scrooge had never seen. A room covered in rags and old clothes, shoes, blankets, stinking place, and children coughing in the dust there are sorting the rags. There is a man there, Joe. He greets 3 people as they come in. An undertaker in his hat, Scrooge's laundress, and his housekeeper. He recognises them. The 2 ladies have large bundles. "Come into the parlour," says Joe, who is obviously the owner of this establishment. And they sit down cackling, and they say, "Well, you go first," to the one, and "No, you go first." And then the undertaker steps forward with a small bundle. He says, "I'll go first." And as he props it down, Joe opens up the little bundle, and there are cufflinks and a watch and 1 or 2 other little trinkets, and Scrooge looks at them. He says, they're mine. But he can only look on as the spirit holds him back. Joe says, "That'll be 8 shillings I can give you for this." Chalks it up on the board. "Right, who's next?" The laundress. She proffers her bundle and opens it. 2 sheets, 2 blankets. "He didn't die in these, did he?" says Joe. "Oh, yes, he did, but he didn't die of anything you can catch." "Oh, thank goodness," says Joe. And then there's 1 or 2 other things, couple of silver spoons, that kind of thing. 17 and 6 I'll give you for this bundle. Chalks it up. And then Scrooge's housekeeper opens her bundle. "Bed curtains, velvet bed curtains, that's what I've got, plus this shirt." And Joe looks at the bed curtains. "These are fine," he says. "These are fine curtains. And that shirt," says the housekeeper, "is of the finest linen. Took it off his body myself," she says. "He didn't die in these," said Joe. No. They was gonna bury him in it. But that's his best shirt. You'll find no wear marks in that. I dressed him in an old calico shirt. Calico's good enough for the dead. And they laughed as he tottered up how much money. Scrooge was looking at his things. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. But then the sleeve is offered and Scrooge takes a hold. And away to Bob Cratchit's house they go, to a sad scene. No Tiny Tim, no Bob Cratchit. The children are around reading to mother who is sewing. Are you crying, mother? No, my tears. It's because my eyes are straining in this light. Father will be home soon. He is late. And in comes through the door a very sad, very dour Bob Cratchit. He puts his hat on the hook and he says to his wife and his children, I've been to the site where they will lay our Tim. It's under a tree. It's quite secluded. A little robin was chirping there. He would have loved that spot. Bob Cratchit goes upstairs and the spirit drifts with Ebenezer upstairs. And there on the bed is a little boy, cold and still. And Bob sits next to the bed and he tidies the hair of that still boy. Then he kisses him on the forehead, goes down to his family and says, as you grow old, as you grow, we must not forget the name of Tim, our Tiny Tim. Sadly now, the spirit offers his sleeve. Scrooge is almost beside himself with sorrow. But away they go to the churchyard. And Scrooge is wondering, why are they in the churchyard? And the spirit points to a grave. Scrooge looks at the grave and he says, what do you want? And the spirit urges him to go and look. And when he looks down, he sees his own name. Are these the things that will be? Or are they the shadows of the things that could be? But the spirit doesn't answer. It simply fades. And Scrooge grabs hold of his legs. No, I need to know. And he starts to scream. And as he screams, he opens his eyes and he's holding on to the corner of his bed. He blinks. Church bells are ringing outside. He runs to the window. It opens the window and just below is a boy. Boy, what day is it? Why, sir, says the boy, 'tis Christmas Day. Scrooge is beside himself. He dances around the room. What shall I do? In comes his housekeeper. His bed curtains are still on the bed. He looks at her. He starts to dance around her. She's quite bemused. What's going on? Are you mad, sir? Have you gone mad? No, he says. Indeed. And he sits down. And he sits down next to her and he says, how much do I pay you? 2 shillings a week. I'll double that. And she looks at him quite bemused and he fishes into his pocket and takes out a gold guinea and puts it into her hand. Oh, what's this for? Keep your mouth shut because you've gone mad? No, that's for Christmas, my dear. So Merry Christmas and get yourself off home. She's absolutely delighted. Bob's your uncle, she says as she runs down the stairs. Scrooge now, starting to clean himself, suddenly stops, opens the window again. He looks out. Boy. Yes, sir, says another boy. Is the poulterer's still open round the corner? Well, yes, sir, I just passed it. Is the prize turkey still there? Oh, hanging up in the window, sir. Tell you what, boy. Yes, sir. I'll give you 1 shilling if you'll run round and bring the poulterer here with that prize turkey. Really, sir? Yes. And if you do it within 5 minutes, I'll give you half a crown. That boy runs off and Scrooge runs to his desk and he writes Bob Cratchit's address on a label. He then begins to dress. The poulterer arrives. Scrooge pays him handsomely for the turkey. The boy will deliver it. Label and all, half a crown is given to the lad. Scrooge has never felt better in all his life. At Bob Cratchit's house, they can't understand. They cannot understand where this turkey has come from. There are other trimmings too, and plenty to drink. And then Tiny Tim looks at them all and says, I know where this has come from. And they all look at him. Where? Mr. Scrooge has sent it, I bet. They all look at him, confused. But Scrooge, meanwhile, has dressed, and he's made his way through the streets, where people who normally get out of the way are greeted with Merry Christmas. And two particular gentlemen are found. The gentleman who came to his office and left. Are there no prisons? No workhouses? Those gentlemen. And Scrooge walks up to them and they almost walk away, and he says, Gentlemen, I owe you such an apology. I am so sorry for the way I treated you. And then he whispers in their ears, How much? Are you sure, Mr. Scrooge? Aye, he says, and not a farthing less. Now, Merry Christmas. People around were amazed at the transformation, and the blind man in the corner, whose dog normally drags him out of the way of Scrooge, is amazed when Scrooge puts a guinea in his cup. The dog wags his tail. Scrooge is a changed man, and he makes his way to his nephew's house. He knocks on the door, but he's quite unsure. The door opens, the maid greets him, surprised but smiles, takes his hat, his scarf and his coat. Inside the parlour he can hear people making merry. He opens the door. Everybody turns and looks at him. They cannot believe their eyes. Uncle Ebenezer, says his nephew. Ebenezer looks at him and says, Am I too late for your invitation for dinner? No, Uncle, come in. And just then his wife stands up, Ebenezer's niece by marriage. And she looks at him, and Ebenezer says, I have been such an old fool. Will you ever forgive me? And she embraces him and kisses him gently on the cheek. And then one of those gathered says, Music! Let's have a dance. Let's have a polka. And Scrooge dances around the parlour with his niece. What a wonderful day they had. The next morning, Scrooge is at his office early, waiting for Bob Cratchit. The clock struck 9. No Bob. It was a full 18 minutes after 9 when Bob rushed in, full of apologies for being late. I'm sorry, sir, he said to Scrooge. No doubt, said Scrooge. Now come into my office before you dot another I or cross another T. I want a word with you. Bob Cratchit, full of dread, enters Scrooge's office and stands in front of his desk. Scrooge eyes him over his glasses. He thumps his desk and said, This isn't good enough, Bob Cratchit. From this moment on, I am doubling your wages. Now put some more coal on the fire. In fact, go and buy a new coal scuttle. Bob doesn't quite know what to say. Scrooge apologises to Bob Cratchit for being such a miserly old fool and would like to take better care of Bob, but most importantly, help raise that family of his, especially Tiny Tim. And from that moment on, everybody knew that Scrooge was the man who knew how to keep Christmas. And so, in the words of Tiny Tim, God bless us, everyone. Merry Christmas. Well, I hope you enjoyed my little story there. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your time. If you did enjoy it, I know it's a bit different from my normal history subject, but if you did enjoy it, like, share and subscribe. And don't forget to turn on the all notification buttons, because you never know what's coming down the line with Kevin. But before I go, a quick shout out to a couple of my Patreons, Steve Valley and Peter Keane. Hey guys, thanks a million, and thanks to everyone. Merry Christmas.